Welcome back to Careers and Coffee Talk. I'm your host, Laura. Today I'm joined by Marcus Coleman, the Vice President of Community Resilience Strategy at United Way Worldwide. Marcus is known for his superpower, connectedness, and for building bridges between government, faith communities, and nonprofits to solve shared problems. From his years in public service to his current work at United Way, he's been at the heart of building partnerships that truly matter. Today, we're going to talk about connection, how communities can come together in the face of challenges, and the role of faith in leadership, with a look at what gives Marcus hope for the future. Let's get into it. Marcus, I'm so thrilled to have you with me here today. I'm so glad we could make this happen. Thanks for
I,
joining me.
Thank you. I know it has taken forever. I'm so sorry, but it has been great to see your show, and I love the conversations you've been having. Thank you for your efforts and for your service and helping to really keep us all connected as public servants.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now, this is the most important question of all, of course. Do you have a coffee or another beverage with you? I know it's late in the day for coffee today.
Yeah, I was gonna say at the time of this recording, I'm on water time. So
Okay,
what I
okay.
have with me, and this is actually a water bottle that I got in Dubai,
Nice.
as
Ah,
going with a few other of my colleagues in former federal service role during COP28. And it was
that is
actually
fantastic.
why this is important to me. It was also the first time that COP had a faith pavilion. So I was there representing at the time FEMA on a multi-faith panel about how the faith community works in addressing different types of impacts from extreme weather. So that's what's in my cup today is a glass water. It's not a glass, it's a bottle of water.
I love it. I love it. And that is so meaningful and ties to what we're going to dive into today. One of the things that really stood out to me as we were, preparing for this conversation, and I love this phrase so much. You say that connectedness is your superpower. But I want to go way back to little Marcus growing up. What were you like? And what did you want to be when you grew up?
I I thank you. I will say it is not what I am now. So as a child, like as a very small child, I was a very shy child.
Okay.
Uh Youngest of three, and youngest of three with a pretty sizable gap between me and my next oldest sibling.
Okay.
And I'm also a millennial of a certain age, and I found this out through social media a few years back. Apparently, a whole subset of us wanted to be marine biologists, and I don't know where
Yeah,
that
that was a
comes from.
thing.
That was
That
a
was a
thing,
thing.
and it's weird, right? This was pre-social media, so the fact that so many people that were '80s babies wanted to be the same thing, and
I
I'm,
don't know
I'm
what
going to
that
charge it
was.
to Free
Yeah.
Willy for me. That maybe that was the thing,
Oh,
but
you
right, like
know
we also
what?
were children of like Free Willy, Jaws,
Hmm.
Little Mermaid. Like we were exposed to a lot of water-based stuff, so maybe that was the deal. But yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
clearly not a marine biologist now, but that is the earliest, like, this is what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah, that's so interesting and funny that you say that because I've never really I've never really thought about that. But I wasn't one of them, but there were a lot of people that thought that's where they were headed.
Mhm.
Um, how does I guess interesting to go from there, right? Like how does that show up in the way that you connect people and what you do now? Does it at all?
No, not at all.
No.
The work I do, as most people in the disaster emergency space, like
Yeah,
there's a few lucky people, and God bless them. This is what they want us to do their whole life. Like
sure. Yeah.
this was not my jam. Like I did want to be a city manager. So
Hmm.
when I was an undergrad in college, one of the things that had popped up for me that I loved organizational effectiveness. I
Okay.
always found it interesting how people made
Hmm.
decisions. Like my business undergrad major was business management, which on the surface sounds like I should have been a psychology major, but what I loved about business management was like organizational psychology. So
Hmm.
I was not in the corporate space necessarily, but I
Sure.
loved the fact that like big companies and corporations would work with cities. So my initial like my big person career goal
Hmm.
was to try and be a city manager. And it was actually by way of my grad degree and grad program that I had learned about emergency management as a profession and
Okay.
career. And for me, it's like city management times 1,000. Like, right, if you're doing
Yeah.
emergency management right, your relationships, all of the ways that different systems connect with each other, you have to very quickly mobilize people and build it to scale. And so I'm grateful to like extend some of that work in my current role
Yeah.
as Vice President of Community Resiliency for United Way.
Yeah. Well, you've really built a career around bringing people together and solving like these tough problems. So, can you think of a time or a story where that's really worked and you thought like, yes, this is why I do what I do?
Yeah, I mean, some of it goes back to like as a child growing up. So while
Hmm.
marine biology was my thing, like service was a
Yeah.
big thing in life. And it was actually former governor of Arizona, Janet Napolitano, who
Hmm.
had raised her hand as a governor when President George W. Bush started the Faith-Based and Communities initiatives and
Right.
said basically, right, we need government and the faith community working together to solve a few problems. And the first
Hmm.
time I saw it was Governor Napolitano was leading a big veterans homelessness effort
Yeah.
and working with the faith community, private sector partners. Like I got to see it again, I'm in middle school, high school at this point. So being able to see that was just interesting to me. And that was kind of what pursued my general interest in like how can we get more faith groups and nonprofit groups to work with government to think about so things that I've worked on, closing the digital divide. So like at a younger age was helping to do digital literacy work. They call them digital literacy workshops now, but like right,
Sure.
how to use a computer, like
Hmm.
all of that stuff, working with older adults, with kids,
Hmm.
um, employment opportunities for youth. So helping to increase exposure to different career opportunities. So during my
Yeah.
summers in undergrad, I was running a summer youth employment program from my local church in Tucson, Arizona. And it was really intended. Like, you when you're a certain age, you kind of think you only have three or four career choices, and then you
Yeah.
find out there's a lot more. And so, the story where I saw that it worked was really when I saw the governor working with President Bush to address veterans homelessness, and then just different versions of that with
Yeah.
different again, having private sector, nonprofit sector, and other groups come together and really be committed to like solving what some folks feel like intractable problems
Hmm.
and making inroads in a way that is truly meaningful, right, and
Yeah.
sustainable because no one sector or no one organization does anything alone, and that has
Right.
definitely been the case in the years since I saw some of that work.
Yeah, no, I love that the interest was sparked so young for you. When we think about, shared problems, these are often the things that affect all of us, right? Like
Hmm.
disasters, public health issues, equity. But sometimes I think those problems are just really hard to see. And maybe that's in part because we're all kind of looking through our own lens, right?
Yeah.
How do you find that common ground and help people realize, like, wait, this is actually a shared challenge?
I I've learned that common ground through like four exceptional leaders that all
Hmm.
happen to be FEMA administrators. So if you'll humor me
Okay.
for a minute,
Yeah, sure.
so what I learned from former Administrator Fugate was you can move conversations along by helping people see their shared responsibilities. So, right,
Mm.
former Administrator Fugate, former Administrator, Deputy Administrator Serino, whole
Hmm.
community is what they are known to
Yeah.
kind of. And Craig was always clear. I didn't make this up. This is just what we saw locally happening, and we just want to nationalize it.
Yeah.
And then what I learned from former administrator Brock Long was the importance of helping to make sure that people's roles were clear and that we can reduce the complexity of like how we work together. So like
Yeah.
right, he had a lot of big contributions, but two of my favorites being very clear, locally executed, state managed, federally supported. And I think that
Hmm.
falls a lot of how we think about problems, right? The people closest to the problems know how to execute it. We have to trust them and entrust them with
Right.
additional support. You're
Right.
going to have be it regional or state, there's going to be a supportive role. And then ultimately, like, right, there has to be a manager. And of course, in
Hmm.
our profession, we think about the emergency manager that has like
Hmm.
a very difficult job description because they want you to do everything with no real authority.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, man, like, his lesson was, when we think about shared problems, having clear roles is key. And then from former Administrator Pete Gaynor, while I didn't have the pleasure to support him directly in a federal service capacity,
Hmm.
I was in the private sector at the time, but I loved the value and emphasis that he put on investing in your people and
Yeah.
really thinking about what core values mean as an individual and kind of how you live that out to address
Yeah.
the shared problem. And then, of course, former FEMA administrator Deanne Criswell taught me and so many others a lot about what it really means to try to be people first, not just when it's convenient for the problem that you're looking to solve, but
Hmm.
how do you more intentionally put people first throughout the whole process of creating and identifying ways to approach shared problems to do
Yeah.
big things. And like I'll admit, like I'm learning from my current president and CEO, Angela Williams, while not a former FEMA administrator,
Yeah.
very much a crisis leader in her own right and has an extensive record there. But she has really challenged me to think differently about, finding common ground means being able to listen to people at the point of their pain and really
hmm
leaning into how you can help bring different types of supports or partners. Like she's helped me bring the super connectedness thing to a whole new level in
Yeah, I
really
love
thinking
that.
about like the scope and scale of problems that are, oftentimes again above and beyond, I think, what one particular sector can do.
I love that. I love that you've taken these lessons, these lessons from each of the leaders, whether you've worked under them or not, that you've that it's helped inform, the way that you make decisions and how you do your work still to this day. The other thing I really love about your work is how intentional you are when it comes to building relationships. And, not all partnerships are created equally, right? They're all different. Some partnerships just click, whatever it is. But when you think about the ones that really stand out, what is it that you think makes them work, or what are some things in common that you found?
Sure. I appreciate the question. I've often struggled because really partnerships to me is just a extension of relationships.
Yeah.
And like, right, I think there's some social science research out there that talks about at the most any one person can really only maintain or sustain 150 relationships at once.
hmm
Which is a challenge depending on what you're doing in the world because right, trying to make
Sure.
sure the entire nation is prepared or trying to reduce disaster risk.
It's kind
So
of a big job.
it's a huge job, right? So like I think that what's helpful for me is really checking in with myself, like what my
Yeah.
values are, and then finding alignment and connection to people whose even if their values are different than mine on the surface, like fundamentally we're caring about the same things. I'll
Mm-hmm.
say there's like two. I read a lot of different books. So the two books that kind of help me think about being intentional with relationship building and partnership development, one is a book called Essentialism, and
Okay.
it's about just being really clear about what's most essential and where your highest point of contribution can be. And the notion is, right, to be a good partner, you should be really clear with yourself first about where you can be the highest contributor. And then the second is a book called Creating Great Choices. Essentialism, I think it's Greg McKeon is his name. Creating Great Choices is a book that was written, co-authored by Jennifer Riel and Roger Martin. And what Creator Great Choices is about is ultimately you're often going to live in a world where you're taking two opposing ideas. And instead of trying to decide whether or not you go from A to B, that you look at the aspect of those ideas, or in this case, for a partnership, the shared capabilities, values. There may be some things that you see similar. And how can you take
Mm.
pieces of each of that to create something that's much better than anyone imagined?
Yeah.
Those are kind of two books that have really helped inform how I think about partnerships.
Yeah.
One, what it means to be a better partner, but then two, like what's the process you need to undertake to like really be humble enough to know, right? You might be bringing something to the table, but it's not the whole thing,
Right.
and inviting opportunities for people to be and show their best to be first.
Yeah, I love that. I do have a book club page on the website, careersandcoffeepod.com. So
Awesome.
definitely be adding both of those so that people can easily link and read those too. So thanks for sharing that. Marcus, you've been in the middle of some really big moments, whether it was, disasters or different crises, COVID response, right? What to you stands out most as a time that you really saw a community bounce back in a way that really was moving to
Yeah,
you?
yeah. So that this actually goes back to the question you just asked.
Yeah.
Time and again, especially in crisis and disasters, I know many of your listeners are familiar with the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. That
hmm
is a national network of about 70 plus nonprofit and private sector partners and others committed to making sure, in the United States at least, that there's a concerted effort that emphasizes coordination, collaboration, cooperation, and communication, all in support of survivors.
Yeah.
And that network, right, there's also 50 plus state and territory VOADs. And that is an ecosystem. Every crisis, just remarkable stories of the Buddhist community, working with the Jewish community and Christian-based organizations, logisticians connecting with folks who rebuild homes and distribute commodities. Since being at the United Way Worldwide is a member of the National Void as well. But it's
Hmm.
been moving to see how organizations like United Way, Red Cross, Feeding America, Team Rubicon, U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, while not a member of National Void, a big supporter, but the ways in which, right, we rally around that individual that was courageous enough and was willing enough to say, despite the disruption that I face, I want to be there for my neighbors. Something that
Hmm.
Deputy Serino had talked about again and again was the importance of the neighbor helping neighbor element during a
Yes.
major
Yeah.
disaster. And we saw that throughout, right? Superstorm Sandy. I know we're, 20 years since Katrina.
Yeah.
What's fundamentally true is there are always going to be people that stand up and stand out. And what I love about what stands out about those moments is that you then have a community of or a whole network of organizations that wrap around that person or that community group and
Yes.
really tries to lead through the harder parts of disaster response and recovery. It gets harder, as you know, right? You've been doing this
Yeah.
work with me for a long time too. You have a lot of folks that 2 to 5 years after the cameras leave and the donations slow down, it's still the will of the people that are going to help
Hmm.
find the solutions that are next. And it takes that ecosystem of groups that always, remind me that ultimately the way that you bounce forward isn't just through having infrastructure from a physical place and part,
Right.
but you need that social infrastructure invested in as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so important.
Mhm.
Um, I think one thing that any of us who have worked in crisis response know, there's always a curveball. There's always something you didn't anticipate,
Mhm.
something you expected to go one way and it doesn't. That's kind of what keeps us all on our toes, I think. Um, is there a moment you can think of something that maybe didn't go as planned and you really had to think on your feet? And what did that look like for you?
Man, yeah. So I was in the last few days of actually a crisis leadership development program
Hmm.
at the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative.
Yep.
And the on the night before that day, there was a shooting at Mother Emanuel AME Church. And it was this was like, I would say 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years
Hmm.
ago. Um, but it was an inflection point. At that point,
Yeah.
Sandy Hook had already happened.
Yeah.
There was already concern about, how do we help keep different places of different community spaces safe.
Yeah.
And what was challenging about that on a few levels is that like there were no easy answers to like how
Mm,
you keep people safe and to
right.
have people shot that were welcoming people to worship with them. It just raised a lot of questions. What it meant for me practically, and I didn't know, like it very clearly came into focus at this time. At the time, the you had several federal agencies working together. We had
Hmm.
some initial guidance out as a result of the unfortunate shootings in Oak Creek and
Yeah.
Sandy Hook. And I was tagged to be it. And in the program that I was in at the National Preparedness Leadership Program, and it's actually one of the books. They have a book called You're It about how it means to lead through a crisis. And like within an instant, it went from like seeing this very tragic story with all of these big questions. And like there was stuff that was way above my pay grade that we weren't going to touch.
Right.
But the very specific crisis that I had to think about that didn't go as planned is like, how do you quickly build something that can help the faith community holistically be better prepared for whatever
Yeah.
crisis comes up next? And it unlocked this very long series of opportunities that actually still persist, thanks to some of the partnership and collaboration with colleagues at
Yeah.
CISA, both current
Yeah.
and former. Like there's a Protecting Places of Worship Weeks of Action now,
Hmm.
which the last few weeks of the month of September, there's a concerted effort to help at least, again, we can't solve all the problems, but we can definitely help more of the more than 300,000 or so places of worship have a starting point for like how to make sure that they can take some preparedness steps to help people
Yeah.
worship and fellowship safely. So it's an unfortunate crisis that still doesn't have easy answers,
Yeah, that's right.
but quickly found out that like the thing that didn't go as planned, like thinking on my feet, required immediately thinking about the relationships that can
Yeah.
help build some momentum in a different way.
Yeah, it all goes back to that, doesn't it? When you and those are some heavy issues to have to think through, right?
Yeah.
Um, it can be daunting in a lot of ways. It can also
Mhm.
be it can be draining, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's hard to be in that sort of mindset and have to think through those really tough problems. So when it comes to like refilling your tank when the work gets really hard, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. A few leaders don't know this. In the midst of hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria,
Mm,
there was a particular senior leader that had much harder problems than we were dealing. We were supporting this person,
hmm
and they were talking with someone. They were like, "I need to go for a run." I'm not running
hmm
yet, but the thing that works now, a lot of timed walks, especially when things are getting tough. Just different ways to move your body, right?
Yeah.
For some, I have a very dear friend of mine who is a Zumba instructor. In addition to
Okay.
the work that they did at FEMA, I have another. So I think that like finding ways to move your body is one thing.
Sure.
I'm a big believer in having a leadership journal. I think for
Mm.
anybody, and it's a hard practice to start, but taking 5 minutes every day to just journal and reflect is, I think, a very healthy way to refill your tank. So those are some of the things that I do: journaling, a lot of walking. I've made it more of a point. I feel like admittedly, like social media is a little bit of an illusion because you feel like you're connected to a lot of folks, but you're really just kind of
But are
keeping up with
you?
them.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. And so like being more intentional about trying to create spaces and places to like intentionally
Yeah.
connect with folks.
Yeah.
And DC's a happy hour town. And like
It is.
my new rule for myself is I don't want to have happy hours or coffees. I want to go for walks. So I've had a
Yeah.
few friends who like, hey, I'm looking for career advice, or hey, I'm looking to think through this thing. And if we're walking for 30 minutes, I'm down. But like
Yeah.
I don't want to sit and spend $100 over several beverages of choice, and then it's like we forget what we talked about.
I don't blame you. And I really love that. It's funny you bring up the 2017 hurricane season two, Harvey, Irma, and Maria, because I was at FEMA also during that time and remember feeling like we've got to do something. This is just, it was really hard
Hmm.
to work through those particular disasters. I think maybe just because they were so, they happened one right after the other. And so I used to teach yoga and found myself doing like just 15-minute yoga sessions with fellow colleagues. And I think you're right, like moving your body, there's something about just like taking a little break, whether it's taking a walk or getting outside and
Hmm.
just kind of checking in with yourself or whatever that looks like. I love that you brought that up.
Cool.
Your work is also so deeply rooted in faith-based partnerships, right?
Yeah.
So how does, and you kind of mentioned this early on, how does your own faith show up in the way that you lead?
Absolutely. I'm a Christian Baptist specifically. And so it very much, the basis of a lot of where I function is biblically based and biblically oriented.
Hmm
But I'll say I am just as encouraged, if not more, by seeing other people live out their faith to help
hmm
me reaffirm and to know that like my faith is a contribution to that. So a lot of the space that I also function in is kind of the multi-faith space.
Yeah.
And one of the other books that I'd highly recommend for folks who really want to kind of get an understanding between the role that we can take as a country to address a lot of issues and ills that we face from a service perspective, but then also
hmm
bringing different faiths together. Ibu Patel has a wonderful organization called Interfaith America, but he wrote a book a few years back called Acts of Faith that really helped me find the language on how to stand and operate within my own faith while having very deep appreciation and not just admiration in a passive way, but like actively being engaged in supporting
Sure.
the affirmation of other faiths. We,
Yeah.
you know, our throughout our nation's history, there have been a lot of moments and inflection points where acts of acts of people being able to connect outside of like what is normal for them has been keen to making breakthroughs in diplomacy, to
Mm.
addressing other
hmm
intractable issues. There's another book called Faith in American Public Life, written by Melissa Rogers, formerly of the Brookings Institution, but she catalogs some very specific ways that faith-based partnerships, really since our country's inception, and we're talking interfaith, right? So
Right.
Christians,
Yeah,
Islamic communities, other communities, but just different ways that like the US government has really helped to foster some of this thing that's made our country so special in terms of everyone being able to show up from their place or no faith. So like to be clear,
mm-hmm,
big fan of the Secular Student Alliance. There's a Center for
mm-hmm,
Inquiry. There's humanists. There's folks that are very values driven. But it's knowing that there's often shared commitment to caring for the poor,
sure.
being there for the vulnerable, making sure that right you're following the golden rule, which is treating others
Mm-hmm.
as you want to be treated. That really helps to kind of fill my cup as it relates to how it operationalizes in the work I do every day.
Yeah, I love that. I love all these book recommendations too, by the way. They're all going up on the page.
Okay.
Um, by the way, I'm a big fan of the platinum rule. And I don't know if I made that up or if I heard that somewhere, but I take it a step further from the
Mm,
golden rule to treating people the way that they want to be treated. And that's what I share with
I love that.
mostly with my kids.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of that. Like I tell them like if you fell down, you might want a hug, right? And somebody else might fall down and they need a little bit of space, right?
That's
Like
true.
that's me. If I trip and fall, like I want everybody to look away. My dignity is hurt more than anything else.
Yeah.
But
No,
a
that's
big,
true
big
though.
fan of
I
that,
love
you
that.
know?
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to keep going with the faith conversation, especially
Sure.
because I think you've been in probably a lot of different rooms, right? Where people have very different faith traditions or, perspectives where they're coming from, maybe different worldviews. And so when you find those people coming together, especially when it's on a particular issue, what
Mhm.
is your approach for figuring out where the overlaps are, values they actually share so that you can get to building something that's meaningful together?
Absolutely. So there's one of the concepts in one of the books I recommended, It talks about the walk in the woods, and some of it is rooted in just how to have healthy integrative negotiations. So most
Hmm.
people see negotiations as right, somebody wins and somebody loses.
Sure. Yeah.
I think probably the book that's most familiar with, especially professionals with integrative negotiation, is Getting to Yes by William
Yeah.
Irwin. But
Uh-huh.
in the Urit book and Walk in the Woods, a lot of what it talks about is basically spending enough time, having the courage to spend enough time to explore someone else's shared interest before you start inserting your own.
Hmm.
And going through that iterative process. And there's a few other like frames of reference. So DePaul University has the Asset-Based Community Development Institute. When we, some of the work I've done in my prior roles, there's a building resilient communities framework that's very much laying out and mapping out very specifically, like, right, how do you figure out, and some of it is just like listening, like the
Hmm.
FEMA administrator, Chriswell, she was a master of listening to a survivor story and then
Yeah.
translating that story into like some form of policy shift or policy change,
Yes.
or just
Uh-huh.
raising the level of consciousness. And I'm again, and I've seen Brock do it, I've seen Craig
Hmm.
do it, I've seen Pete do it, but I'll say, it's hard to know how to figure out, especially if you're coming from the perspective of being a content matter expert. So, right, like your
Hmm.
content expertise, you might be a floodplain manager, an insurance adjuster, but then being able to translate that very quickly to a context that somebody has
Sure.
is definitely a challenge. And so, but for me, like the walk in the woods is probably the tool and approach I use the most, which walks through, your individual interests, your shared interests, ways that those interests connect, and then ways that they may be able to be pieced together to identify how to approach some shared problem.
Yeah. When it comes to, the aspect of listening, right? You've really done a lot of work and spent a lot of time making sure that those vulnerable voices, the most vulnerable among us are heard.
Mhm.
Um, how do you make space for a community that, may otherwise be overlooked in the
Yeah.
work that you do?
I have seen different versions of this. I will
Hmm.
say, I think especially, I love the platinum rule. I think that that's a good place to
You
start.
like
It's
that?
it's giving people the opportunity to invite you into how they want to be engaged.
Hmm.
And so, right, one of the tactics post disaster that you often see are town halls. When there was the storm that had no name in 2016, and we intentionally worked with the state, several faith institutions, and a bunch of other partners, and we used a familiar tool, a town
Hmm.
hall, But
Mm-hmm.
we tried to take a step back, and this was under the leadership of Reverend David Myers, who was my predecessor and former boss at the
Sure.
Center for Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. And what he did basically scared everybody. He said, look, we're not going to force people to sit through a bunch of presentations for 45 minutes and take questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the town hall. The
Mm-hmm.
town hall we're going to do is we're going to take survivors' questions first,
Yeah.
and we'll just set up a panel to answer their questions as they come out. And people freaked out. And those were some of the most impactful moments for all of the federal and government partners involved
Mm-hmm.
because we were able to help people with the question and information that they needed at the time. And
Yeah.
I really think when we start talking about vulnerable voices, vulnerability also looks different ways in different places
Yeah.
and spaces. Like just because
Yeah.
you're rural or tribal doesn't mean you're vulnerable. You might be very strong in some ways. You just
Yeah.
need to know how to pivot that towards something else.
Yeah.
But I think that, making time to listen and listen
Mm.
with the intent to act in the direction of what they're
Yeah.
looking for is the real key to make space for a community that might feel overlooked. Because oftentimes, if you sat with a survivor, or even if you're in a meeting with a colleague, or let me say, this is a career conversation.
Yeah.
If you are sitting across from an employer who is asking you a question and you fill up the space for 5 to 10 minutes talking all about yourself or all about a very specific thing and you overlook what their interest might be, like they asked you
Mm-hmm.
that question for a reason. And
Yeah.
so being curious a little bit longer about where you may be able to connect with that employer is a critical
Mm-hmm.
piece to making people feel like, oh, they're actually interested in the problem I want to try to solve. They may not have figured it all out now, but
Yeah.
we have a better handle on like how they think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really great. I think the other thing is the word equity, right? It's become very politicized. One might even say it's become misunderstood. It's been thrown around a lot, especially lately. When you think about equity in your work, what does that mean when it's actually done right? When it's not just, a buzzword,
Mhm.
but when it's actually done right.
Well, so what's interesting about the word equity is if you talk to,
Hmm.
to a bunch of financial service providers, they think about private equity, right? So
Sure. Might
I
think of it
think
differently.
it serves a function. I
Hmm.
I think what we ultimately talk about when we're talking about there are people in this world that for no other reason than like where they were born are looking for people to know and understand how they solve problems. Like,
Mm.
how do you do that in a fair and in an impartial manner? There's a lot that any organization and any one set of organizations can learn from folks that have a lot of assumptions about them. And I'll use a very counterintuitive example because we often think about conversations around equity in terms of people either not having positions or not having power. But I'll
Hmm.
say again, you have a lot of organizations that very much want to be involved in problem solving and they may be well resourced, right? They might be a
Yeah.
major foundation, they might be a big corporate funder, they might be a government agency or government entity, and they're looking for that opportunity to engage in a way. And I think how it's done right. And examples like that is just taking time to really appreciate and understand that they may have some constraints where they can't move as quickly as you want them to solve a particular problem. When we
Hmm.
talk about what it means to stand alongside survivors or people that for other reasons have felt systemically removed or not included in decisions and discussions, a lot of that work really gets to being humble enough to realize that the problem that I want to solve may not be the problem that they need to solve in the moment.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so, right, that there is a lot of, one of the adages we often hear is it's better to teach a person to fish than to give them a fish. But it
Right.
is also still true. I ain't going to be able to learn how to fish or how to learn if I'm still hungry. And so when
Right.
I think about where we meet the needs of folks at this time, it's the work of our partners like Feeding America, who are working
Hmm.
with local United Ways and working with other community-based groups to ensure that kids have the nourishment they need to be in a position
Hmm.
to learn. It's the work
Yeah.
that I see some of our local United Ways do. For example, in Asheville, Buncombe County, they've been doing some awesome work for a long time through the Communities and Schools program and has used that work as the basis of helping to meet the needs of communities that absolutely felt like they were ignored as the
Yeah,
recovery efforts were early on going. And it's the work that we saw. Again, I think that the 20-year anniversary of Katrina raises a lot of uncomfortable questions.
it
But what's
does. Yeah.
undoubtedly clear is the more successful stories of resilience ultimately came from organizations and people being humble enough to sit with those people that were most impacted and worked with them to find solutions. That's where you got the
Mm,
powerful stories that people heard a few weeks ago. And
yeah.
that's how you make it not a buzzword, right? It's being present and humble enough to know the language someone uses, the beliefs that someone has, the values that someone has isn't always going to fit neatly into the box that you want to put them into. There's a lot of other terms that you know and I know that are equally politicized, and people may
Hmm.
not care about them, but they care about the fact that the community that they're in is flooded more frequently. They care about the
Right.
fact that it's harder to grow and harvest the crops at the volume that's needed to keep the business going. And so I stay focused on people's interest and people first, because
Hmm.
ultimately some of this doesn't matter what you call it. People want to
Hmm.
get fed, they want their
Still,
kids to
right.
learn. You know what I mean?
The
Like there's some
need still
common
exists.
values.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. If I were to go back to the beginning of this conversation, maybe we fast forward a little bit. Maybe it's not little Marcus, but Marcus ready to take on the world right out of college. If we were to take, maybe I was going to say get a coffee, but maybe if we were to take a walk with Marcus as you were getting your started in your career, um, what advice would you give yourself back then? What is something that you know now that you wish you knew then?
The importance of writing your vision up front. And
Hmm.
so the job that I'm in now at United Way is something I wrote about 7 years ago without
Yeah.
knowing. And when I was fresh out of college, one of my family mentors gave me a book that specifically talked about the importance of writing your vision. And I'm all for AI. I think Gen AI is great. Agentic AI does a lot of amazing things. But
Hmm.
the biggest, and it stinks, but the truth is, especially from like because I graduated right out of college in 2008. So like
Hmm.
no job prospects, went
Right.
home, spent a ton
Right.
of money, didn't know what was
Yeah.
gonna happen. And I was like, what do you mean you want me to write? Like life is hard, but I can't. I have learned over my years that until I become clear with myself on
Mm.
what's important to me, what I value, and I can be clear about how I want to connect with what other people value. Like our most effective partnerships and engagements in any organization I've been in has been because people have taken the time, and writing is a proxy for active reflection. So
Oh
not
yeah.
just hearing someone, but again, thinking about what is
Getting it
being
out.
said, and right, and
Hmm.
organizing it in such a way that people know how to work and be with you. Because ultimately, leadership, and for anybody who is a leader, and again, you're talking to employers, you're ultimately hoping that the employer brings you on so they can follow you on your journey for wherever you are in your career. And
Sure.
there's a few, just if I could throw out, Coaching for Leaders is a great podcast. He has a particular episode about vivid visioning that I think is really
Yeah.
helpful. It's in an organizational context, but Dave Stachowiak has a lot of great context for folks that are on the career track. HBR, Harvard Business Review,
Yeah.
one of their authors, who's one of my favorite folks, is Dory Clark. So they have just a tremendous, tremendous amount of content for people who are looking to reinvent themselves in their career, to navigate their
Yeah.
career. She wrote a sentimental book for me called Stand Out. Has another book called Reinventing You. Has a really interesting article about how to treat your career as a political campaign. She was writing this stuff like 5, 10 years ago, but it's very
Yeah.
powerful. But it all comes back to like you have to give yourself permission to have time to write, and you have to be able to schedule meetings with yourself in the same way that you schedule meetings for anyone else. Like until you take your time and energy that seriously, as a
Yeah.
younger person coming straight out of college, it's
Yeah.
really,
Right.
really hard for people to know how they can come around and support you.
Yeah. I love that. We've got some good reading to do after this, Marcus.
I'm sorry for
Um,
giving you a whole book. Yeah.
no, I love it. It's great. What keeps you excited about doing the work that you do, especially when, at times it can feel really big and overwhelming and maybe even heavy. What keeps you going?
By far, the people across the United Way network, we are
Yeah.
1,100 United Ways across 35 countries. And I had a hard time knowing how United Way function in communities, but always heard them as an important partner. And
Sure.
it blows my mind to meet these like people who are doing everything from tax preparation to helping people again have access to food to economic mobility, and just the way that our United Way network really tries to show up as authentic partners and collaborators to different sectors. Like it's something that when I was graciously offered the opportunity to say yes last year. Like I had no idea the breadth and depth that like we really make an effort to be an active contributor and mobilize at the level of community. And I will say we are hiring across the network, so it may not always be United Way Worldwide, but the United Way Careers page has a lot of opportunities across our network. And so if you're hearing this and you're interested, and there's places
Go
all
check
across
it
the
out.
country, please, because we need more good people. And I think,
That's
when I
right.
when I think about the superpower, like United Way is absolutely like a network whose superpower is connectedness, but it becomes the origin story of most United Ways is people connecting around addressing a particular need or crisis at that time in their community. And I think that just reinforces the importance of how vital it is to have different organizations and different people that are humble enough, but also bold enough to like lead in a way that, to your point about the platinum rule, meets the needs
Hmm.
of people and how they want to be treated, not just what we think is best.
Yeah, I love how excited you are. I think that that's it's contagious. So for someone who's listening to this, we'll definitely put that page up here on screen, if especially if you're following along on YouTube. But for someone who, wants to get into that type of work, is that the best place you would say to start is with United Way Worldwide, or are there other opportunities that they could consider to get into this type of work?
For sure. So learning space is a place for nonprofit sector. So United Way has
Hmm.
information, of course. If you're
Yep.
talking specifically disasters, nonprofit work, Center for Disaster Philanthropy, great partners. Candid.org is another great partner. There's a lot of some of the thought, if you're looking for the thought leadership piece, there's Stanford Innovation Review. Those are places to kind of get some ideas. I would encourage everybody that's hearing this. And again, I recognize that folks are in very different places in terms of capacity, either
Hmm.
financially or with time. Like just connecting with your local nonprofit community and finding your local nonprofit of choice. Like if your jam is pets, making some time to go to the local pet shelter still matters. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
volunteerism, and there's levels of volunteerism for some of us as professionals, right? Like if I had an area that I can give more time to, is I'd love to connect with some of my colleagues, both current and former in federal service, and really have some
Hmm.
conversations about how we can be supportive from a volunteerism perspective, serving on
Hmm.
national on boards for community-based nonprofits.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, if nothing else, again, find your jam in your house. If you have kids and you want to get more involved in programming, like there's nonprofits that focus on that. If you have pets, there's definitely nonprofits there. But yeah, if you want to connect with the United Way, our United Ways are connected to a lot of different organizations. And so connecting with your local United Way would be a great way to kind of understand where your talents and gifts and treasure may be of most support.
Yeah. Or maybe go take a walk with Marcus.
Hey, you could. It'd help me put on the miles. I count my steps every day. So
I love it. Thank you so much for your time today. United Way Worldwide is so lucky to have you, Marcus, and appreciative of the conversation. I love doing this.
thank you. I appreciate you, Laura, and looking forward to staying in touch.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Careers and Coffee Talk. Big thanks to our guest today for pouring out so many great insights. And hey, thanks to you for hanging out with us. If this episode gave you a little jolt of inspiration or made your day a little bit more brewed and balanced, be sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming up next. Got a minute? Drop me a 5-star review. It's basically the podcast equivalent of buying me a fancy oat milk latte. Quick disclaimer though, the views expressed in this episode are personal and do not reflect those of any organization. This conversation is not an endorsement of any company, product, or service. It's just real talk over virtual coffee, okay? So until next time, stay curious, stay caffeinated, and keep chasing the career that makes you feel the most alive. Catch you next time.